Hey, how's it going? Good to see you.
Hi. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I hope we'll see a few more people join in today. On a Monday morning, we were just talking about, what a great way to start the week is just throw yourself live and talk about what's coming for the week and what happened last week. It's like ease into the week.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Even though
Absolutely.
I feel like the weekend had me thinking a lot. It's like, okay, what are we doing next? What's upcoming?
Yeah.
Um, it is a good place to get catch up. So, what are some things that you went to last week, Nada?
Well, before I go into that, maybe some people are joining us for the first time. So let me just say a little bit
Sure.
about what we're doing here. Who are we? Jason and I are founding partners at the Energy Tech Nexus, and we are an energy transition hub for companies working in and supporting the energy transition. And a few weeks ago, we decided we wanted to come on here live every week and talk to you about what we're seeing happening in Houston, what happened last week, what are we hearing on the ground, and what are things that you should be excited about that are to come next week and for the weeks to come, but also take a look at the broader ecosystem, step out a little bit. I mean, not only look at what's happening in Houston, but what are we seeing happening internationally, nationally that can impact our companies, our investors, etc. So that's kind of the goal and the mission for us being here. We want this to be interactive. So if you're joining us, let us know that you're here. Say hi, because it's hard to tell from the tool that we're using who's there. Um, Ask us questions along the way. Let us know what are the topics you would like us to cover, and we'll try to address them as they come along. We're also live streaming this on YouTube. For some people who might be driving, it might be just easier to access. So if you find the Energy Tech Nexus channel on YouTube, you can subscribe to it, and that way you can easily just Google Energy Tech Nexus, and you'll see the live there. If there are other ways you think you would want to access this, let us know. We're exploring, how we could get it on Spotify, Instagram. Really want it to be easy for you to access and listen to us, whether that's, you're on your way to commute or you're brushing your teeth or whatever you might be doing.
Good.
Anything you
Um,
wanted to add, Jason, before we
no,
dive
I think we
into?
should
No.
we should just jump right
Yeah.
in.
Okay. Yeah. So last week we had our Working Wednesday.
Mhm.
That's an event that we try to throw, especially on weeks where we don't have anything else going on. We have a new location now in closer to the energy corridor, on the West Memorial area. And we had a lot of people show up this time, about what, 15
Oh yeah,
people?
it was
Yeah.
full house. I didn't order enough food, and I hate to say or hate to think it's like when we don't have anything going on because we have so much going on, and on that day we had all a bunch of members come through, and it's great in some sense because then we kind of have impromptu office hours with all the stakeholders who want to catch up and need some help, but then we're also able to introduce the space we're in, share with people what was going on. We had one of our companies meeting with like the CTO of ConocoPhillips that day, just in the space as they're pitching their new product. So it really allows us to bring the community together. Um, and then while we were hosting the event, remember one of our members just walked in. He didn't even know we were there. He has an office. He's in the middle of raising like $100 million right now. And we ended up having a really good conversation for about 15 minutes. And I think that sort of speaks to being in a central place where we can cultivate an innovation ecosystem. And it's about, making connections, feeding people good food, and a good opportunity to be kind of in there and in front of the folks building, companies. So I think it was great.
Yeah. And, one thing I hear from people is like, you always have good food. And that's kind of one of our values at Energy Tech Nexus is we're going to feed you good food. We're all foodies here.
Yeah, yeah, and the Topo Chico. That's like my. I'm waiting for them to come in with a sponsorship. We'll see. I don't think that's fully brand aligned for them, but
Yeah.
no, it was good.
Want to know when our next Work Wednesday is? Just go on Luma, search Energy Tech Nexus, subscribe to us, and you'll be updated there. Our next upcoming event that you can join us at is our Energy Tech Conclave.
Mhm.
This is usually an exclusive event for our members, but we're actually opening it up this time. You want to talk about that, Jason?
Yeah, so usually the Energy Talk Tech Conclave is one where we bring people together. And this year we're taking on the road. So we're visiting a variety of our members' offices just to see how they build their business, everything from a lab to this next one, we're going to the podcast studio actually at the Digital Wildcatters. And we're going to go see a forge at some point, a refinery. We're going to see a manufacturing facility. So just a good chance to get out there. And then we do kind of team building exercises between the founders to make sure we're building a really strong ecosystem. And so this time, though, we also invited the folks from Climate Techies to come in, and we were meeting. And this is another podcast. I think we were actually on the air last week with Salias. And this time, we're going to do like kind of a link a live podcast. We'll keep it short, like 20 minutes, and we'll do it with one of the with gosh, what's his name, Todd Bush over there. He's supporting the Digital Wildcatters. He's at Decarb Hughes, just an all around great guy. So we'll get kind of a 2 for 1. We decided to open it up because the live podcast is more fun with people kind of engaged and people who might want to understand what's going on in our local ecosystem. And there might be some interesting things shared that night that you only get to see when you're on site with the different startup companies. So I'm excited for that. That's on Wednesday.
And we're doing it at the Digital Wildcatters
Yeah,
location. It's a
right
field
on.
trip. Mhm.
Yep, right up Britmore. That's the original Canon, and then the beautiful new Canon's next door. But it's kind of gritty in that way that the startup community can be a lot of fun. Um, and there used to be a pickleball court in the room that we're going to be in, so it's just a fun place. So glad to be doing that.
Yeah. No, I think it'll be fun, and really the focus is gonna be around, have since we have Todd there, decarbonization, CCUS. That's really what Todd has expertise in. He said he might bring in other maybe another speaker who can kind of speak to that. What are the trends that we're experiencing? I know a lot of people are wondering like what's going to happen now with technologies like CCUS and hydrogen. And there was a report that just came out recently that I was reading from Valuates,
Hmm.
which kind of did a survey to understand, what can we expect now that the government focus is moving away from decarbonization. But it said that we expect it to continue moving forward because a lot of these companies have invested heavily into these
Hmm.
technologies, and many of them are not only doing it just for the federal government and its regulations or its incentives, but they're also trying to meet their state regulations or international regulations. A lot of their customers are demanding, they have these scope 3 goals. So they want that visibility and transparency. So it's kind of transcended beyond just because it might have been a regulatory requirement from the government, from the federal government. And also, not to forget that often the efficiency gains also leads to lower cost.
Hmm.
So when you really start looking at it that in that way is, when you're decarbonizing, that also reduces your costs and there's that added incentive.
Yeah.
Um,
Do we
yeah.
want to touch on tariffs a little bit? The big
Yeah.
T word today.
Yeah, I
So
know there were some people last time who wanted us to talk a little bit. I see Lee Bond
yeah,
is here. Hey, Lee.
Haley.
Yeah, let's talk about tariffs.
Yeah.
It
So a
seems like
little
it was
bit.
long time ago, but it's
It
just
was
only a
just
week
last
ago.
week. It was just
Mhm.
last week, and I think part of the reason we didn't touch on it too much last week is we've kind of seen this rodeo before in the sense that there's a lot of kind of public announcement of what's going to happen, and a little bit of I want to say a shock and awe tactic, which I think produces a desired effect, and so there's not much analysis that can happen if we don't really know how people respond, and so I think our perspective was to just kind of terrifying. That's a good one. There was a little bit of us just saying, okay, let's see how this responds. Let's see how the different countries react before we can really see how that affects industry. And so from a like policy and an import perspective, a lot of those things haven't really come into effect. I think there is still a 10% tariff that was increased on Chinese goods. I know a lot of Chinese goods already have a 25% increase. So on a marginal basis, like yes, that is increasing, but the bigger news was on how Mexico and Canada were going to be affected. And so from a like goods coming into the country perspective, we're kind of on a 30-day hiatus until more things get worked out. But I think in the short term, we saw two big things happen. I think one of them, I heard from one of our startups founders say, well, now he's really looking more seriously at what it would be to actually set up an office in the U.S. because it may make sense to actually start to bring in product, get it assembled or made here, which is kind of the desired effect of a tariff. Um, and it may accelerate their desire to kind of join the ecosystem with a larger team. Um, and so that was one effect. And then on the other side, we definitely saw people say, well, the US market feels volatile. And so I'm not sure I want to deploy capital locally. Like it's hard for us to figure out if we're going to even be able to operate if things are changing. And so you kind of get like two responses to that. That is really still in the thought cycle. It isn't really clear action today, but it's already kind of permeating people's strategies. I don't know what you've been hearing, Nada.
Yeah, no, I think it's exactly the same. I think, especially, we have a lot of our members are Canadian,
Mhm.
and we have some, in Mexico too. And especially the Canadian ones, we're working very closely with them. And we have an event where they're all going to come down here for Sarah Week. And a lot of them had questions, but I think what I was hearing from them is like, we want to be in Houston because we want to understand what's going on, and how it's going to impact our business, because not coming down, we're not going to know. And like you said, I think those who were thinking about opening an office in Houston want to double down on that. Some of them already have their manufacturing in the US and they feel really lucky about that. And so are also thinking about how do they move more of the stuff down here. And I think, more, it impacts energy a little bit, especially when you talk about Canada, because a lot of I think it's 10% tariffs on oil and gas coming from
Mhm.
Canada. A lot of that is refined in the US. And that's going to have a big impact on these refineries that are made especially for refining this very heavy oil that comes from tar sands from Canada. So it's going to impact our refineries as much as it's going to impact producers in Canada. And secondly, an industry that's going to impact a lot is the automobile industry,
Mhm.
because, and I did not know this, but a car goes, I don't know if you said this or someone else said this, but a car goes in between like Canada and the US multiple times before it's actually assembled. Like the
Yeah, it's like up
pieces.
to the dozens of times for some
Yeah.
parts, just because 'cause they're literally moving, like, assemblies, like, you imagine, like, the car in your sorry, the chair in your car, like, that is a complex thing with all the motors and all the bits. Even that by itself can move, like, half a dozen times between different factories before it's even inserted in the chassis. So,
Hmm.
just there's so much complexity in our little, like, vehicles that, like, it's just kind of invisible because it just works so well.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
For many of these things, like I think especially for the automobile industry, the Canadian border is very porous.
Mhm.
And so that's going to impact a lot of the car makers, not only their business, but it's going to drive up costs. So I think the number of like 25% tariffs on automobiles was around 6,000, something like $6,000. That's going to impact us on the consumer side.
Mm.
And already over the past decade, we've seen inflation and the average price of a car has gone up. Can you guess what the average price car is today, Jason?
Oh, average price of a car? I'm
Yeah.
gonna go with $40,000. That would be my
Yeah,
guess.
you're close. It's
Okay.
like $45,000. And so if you add like 6,000 to that, like $50,000, that's really, really expensive.
Oh, yeah,
So,
yeah.
but for now, we don't know if it's going to happen because it's a month delayed, the tariffs, until
Yeah,
some conditions are met. So maybe we won't get tariffs at all.
yeah, hopefully. So Seth had a question here on if, VCs would invest in local manufacturing, and so I think, this is a good question. On the one hand, I don't know if VCs should be investing in manufacturing. That's like a personal thing. Manufacturing can be very capex heavy, but there should be investors investing in manufacturing, meaning maybe more private equity or people who know how to run factories. And I think we have been seeing a trend of manufacturing come back, especially with kind of lights out manufacturing. So the key here is U.S. labor is expensive. We're very good at specialized manufacturing, things that are high precision. I think that's why like the U.S. excels at building vehicles. It's a very complicated system. The quality needs to be very high, and so a lot of that does get made here. Um, the Chips Act, for example, is focused on building out our manufacturing capacity in this, very sophisticated process to build stuff on the angstrom scale, like really atom level scale systems. And the question is, where's that advanced manufacturing going to be where it only has to happen here? And we definitely see a lot of kind of just in time manufacturing shops, folks with a lot of automation have been picking up in the last few years. But it's unclear what other kind of manufacturing growth we'll see. I think, yeah, we had that steel and aluminum tariff come in today. Surprisingly, like the heyday of American U.S. steel has was in the past, and a lot of the production today are in kind of mini mills. These are smaller processes, and it has become a very international production process. I don't actually know that much about the steel industry, and there's a part of me that wonders how this tariff will affect people working on kind of the decarbonization process. Like, how are we trying to decarbonize steel? If it's more expensive here, does that actually give us the lift to invest in decarbonization? Those are some of the questions I have swirling about.
Hmm. Yeah, we have one of our members who's working on green steel, so maybe we need to bring her on and get the latest.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, another thing that, as I was reading about the tariffs, was that what was kind of left out of the news because everyone was talking about the tariffs was that the January sales report for EVs and hybrids came out, and um, even though generally the car sales have gone down, the EV sales and hybrid sales went up.
Hmm.
So companies like, and these are not the U.S. based companies, but like Hyundai. I
Hmm.
always struggle with saying them, but like 15% year on year sales went up, 41% gains for their electric models. Same with Kia, with Honda, their sales went up, and even for Ford, even though their overall sales dropped, EV and hybrid sales went up 21 and 19%. So I think there's something to say about an increase in people's comfort level when it comes to buying EVs, even for like Ford buyers.
Hmm.
That despite even news now, everyone knew with Trump coming in, the subsidies are going to go away. That people are beginning to, it's becoming more mainstream in the US. I mean, in the rest of the world, we know like China, definitely EVs dominating the market. But we're seeing with this positive report on increase in sales, and particularly for EVs here,
Yeah.
that it's good for all car makers that are invested in this space.
Yeah. So one of the things that is kind of tied into the tariff discussion is I think there's a recent survey that came out by the University of Michigan that kind of like measures consumer sentiment, and then they also ask people to like predict inflation. And so when the sentiment's down, people like don't have a good view of the future. So it was 71 before, now it's like 68, and so people are looking at a future that's less certain. But importantly, there was a change in inflation expectations, and inflation is this wonky thing. If you expect the price of stuff to go up, you sometimes tend to buy more, and so you create a scarcity of supply because demand has gone up. And so, just in the last 6 weeks of activity, I think or 4 to 6 weeks of activity, we've seen that expectation go up from 3.3% to 4.3%. So that's like a relative basis point change of 25%, meaning people think things are going to get more expensive. And I assume there's two things that drive that. It's the very real perspective of kind of how tariffs are affecting things versus just kind of regular economic uncertainty. What does that translate to as a founder, I guess, is the question here. One translation is people are going to get more expensive because if people think things are expensive, they're going to want to ask for more salary. So when we're doing kind of financial planning for your Series A or future rounds of financing, you still got to predict that the cost of really the best talent is going to continue to grow at the rate we've seen it the last few years. Um, and generally, I would plan conservative with that increase of inflation, just like right on the financial budget. Just plan for a solid 5%. Like that's a way to build contingency into your model. I think the other thing it means is interest rates are probably going to stay high. I think we're all like people who get paid a lot more than me. Go and look at what the Fed does. But if there's a sense that inflation's coming, then they're going to pull back on decreasing the interest rates. The reason that matters is that's going to affect downstream how much venture capital gets put to work. Again, just to kind of go into way too much detail, if I can keep my money in a bank account or I can keep it in a treasury bond as a big investor or an institutional investor, and I can have a safe return there, I'll do that versus putting capital into a very risky venture index. And so I think 6 months ago we were hoping there'll be a lot more capital coming into venture, and I'm looking at these numbers, thinking, okay, people are going to continue to want to keep their capital tight in the safe places because they can get a pretty good interest rate, keeping it in the bank. Um, we all have to wait to see what the next, what the Fed decides to do before they actually do it. But that's just where the tea leaves are pointing today, looking at inflation, which is unfortunate.
Yeah. I was actually listening to a podcast that I can recommend to everybody. The All In podcast had an episode interview with Ray Dalio. So
Hmm.
David
Hmm.
Freeberg, he interviewed Ray Dalio, and he kind of talks about what he envisions happening. And I saw a post over the weekend by one of our other members, Mushkan, who, by the way, if you want to learn anything about like bringing manufacturing domestic to the US, he's the person to follow and talk to about it. But he was talking about how, as a country, we owe 35 trillion in debt.
Hmm.
And he said each taxpayer share of federal debt is over $300,000.
Hmm.
And my question to him was like, we're always talking about debt, right? Like, I think for the past 2 decades, I'm always hearing this in the news that our debt is going up, our debt is going up. And why don't we have mechanisms in place to kind of stop the debt? And what does it actually mean for us? And his response was really, it's basically the inflation that we're seeing is all because we're printing more money, putting more money. But just because you're adding more money doesn't mean that our net worth goes up as individuals, because the value of that money is just going down.
Yeah, yeah. There's a well, we're not an economics podcast, so I'm not going to go
No.
into like the
Yeah.
twisted logic. But it's
Yeah.
yeah, we're borrowing from the future to invest in today, and it's okay to take on debt. It's a question on does that debt go to work where we're supporting economic growth and increase in productivity. And um, I think the last 15 years, we haven't necessarily seen worker productivity pick up. And productivity is like just the amount of like economic output for a given unit of labor. Interestingly, with the deployment of the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS Act and things like that, we have started to see productivity increase for the first time in a measurable way, and that would be good use of capital. And it's unclear if we're going to continue to do that with the new administration.
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. Not really my as area of expertise, finance, but it's like during times like these is like when you start reading and hearing is like when I learn the most about finance and what's happening and how it actually impacts us and what we, not only as individuals, what we need to do about like thinking about our savings and our investments, but also for our businesses. Um, Switching topics a little bit to an area that maybe we're more comfortable talking about, and a Bloomberg NEF report came out talking about green tech.
Mhm.
I actually wrote a post on LinkedIn about, what are we calling this now? Like it was clean tech, climate tech, green tech. So you would see
Energy
all the
tech.
energy tech. Maybe in this new era, it's going to be more energy tech.
Mhm.
Who knows? But anyway, so Bloomberg calls it green tech, and they call it the two-speed energy transition,
Hmm.
where over the past year you've seen a lot of investment in established industries, which is green tech, which is solar, wind, storage on the power grid. There's been a lot of investments made, but somewhat slower in new emerging technologies where we do need more investments for the cost to come down. So things like hydrogen, CCUS, even nuclear. That investment in those industries fell by 23%,
Hmm.
whereas it grew by 15% in the more mature sectors. And
Got
their
it.
analysis was about, the IRA obviously helped get more money to all emerging technologies and also the established ones. But they saw that the private sector did not invest as much in the emerging sector. So we're going to need some more contribution on the innovation and R&D from these sectors to bring down the cost and get to the level of I think yeah, I don't know the exact number of investment that we need to get to net zero, but I think it's right now it's only 37% of what we're investing is is as much as we like. It's only 37% what we're investing compared to what we actually need to actually be able to decarbonize and meet our goals.
Yeah, and I think kind of things that
Mm,
are easy to get lost in the narrative around kind of like the baby drill, statement that came out last week. It's like
mm,
we hit this inflection point, right?
mm,
And it became cheaper to deploy solar than other forms of power. Like, yes, we're still going to have a marginal producer, which is the natural gas genset system, but people are going to invest where it saves money and where it's the most cost effective, and we kind of flip that point. Now, the risks, of course, are that 10% tariffs on China affects Chinese solar panels, right, which is the biggest producer of solar panels that come into the U.S. So now they are more expensive. That will reduce the ability to deploy solar, but guess what? Not all solar gets made in China now. We're actually seeing a lot of that advanced manufacturing move south in Southeast Asia, into other countries like Vietnam and I think Thailand, and that's going to get imported in. So unless we kind of play whack a mole with every country trying to import solar, that the cost fundamentals are already down, and then of course that could be repatriated because you can't tariff inside of the U.S. So we have crossed this kind of inflection point, but that also means like that's a mainstream technology. To your point, Nada, like the early stage technologies, the brand new technologies are always going to be high risk. And I'm not surprised to see like stuff move to like where people know they can make money and where it's low risk and it's already established. And it's not a bad thing to like continue to invest in the decarbonizing stuff. That's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's just not necessarily where we need to focus with our energy tech companies, right?
mm. Wh-
So
what are you seeing in Houston? I know there were some developments with one of our prize startup here working on an hydrogen electrolyzer. Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
yeah, so I think I missed the news until someone pointed it out to me. Ironically, one of my friends out in Hawaii pointed it out to me that Syzygy Plasmonics had to downsize. I think they are cutting about 67 staff between now and the end of the month, and it's going to cut the team in half. And so I texted Trevor and said, "Hey, what's up? How's it going?" And I think that the reality is the there is a lot of market uncertainty. There's not that necessary push from the U.S. And what do you got to do as a founder? You have to make sure that your company is alive. And if that means reducing headcount to double or triple or your runway, that's like the hardest thing you have to do. And it's the hard job of being a CEO in a growth business, because you're always trying to kind of measure the expense and size your business against where the market expectations are going to be. You don't want to be too small, right? If the market is exploding, you want to be there to meet supply. You want to be that first mover. But then if you over-index, then you got to pull back. And the reality is, you imagine, where we were 2 years ago with IRA and things like that. I think everyone was excited about hydrogen, excited about energy, and wanting to deploy capital. And now here we are 2 years later, high inflation has taken its toll. And so everyone's deploying capital in a different way. And the technology at Syzygy works. Like they have announcement after announcement of pilots that are going well. Um, but it doesn't necessarily mean the market is ready. And you always get these kind of pendulum swings of excitement and then slowdowns, especially when people are working on kind of 18-month capital cycles. Um, and they're doing and so Trevor and Suman are doing the right thing of making sure the business has viability while they try to build up, and they'll raise around. Good deals will get funded. I'm not worried about that. It's more about making sure your company is right sized for where the market is. Um, but I think it's just important to recognize this is hard. This is why some companies don't make it, is because sometimes the founders don't make the call and
Hmm.
try to keep running into the wall, hoping they break through it. And this is what you have to do. I think it's a reflection of the inherent risk in venture we see on the larger capital side of things. People are going to be a little more deliberate. I think they raised, if I remember right, $76 million last time. The next round is going to be more than $76 million, and so it's a question of who's deploying those large capital needs. And so it really does feel like an impossible job to like try to like balance all the things and always get it perfect every time. In a business like this, you're constantly going out and kind of probing to see where you need to be. I think the thing to remember about the hydrogen catalysis market is they're not like providing hydrogen for vehicles necessarily. The giant market is actually SMR, steam methane reforming. So, like you think about Oil City, Texas, when you jump in there and you see all those refinery columns, they are using steam to create hydrogen to crack oil, right? And that's the big market for this technology, is replacing a very carbon intensive process that uses a very cheap feedstock. Don't get me wrong. The natural gas is like part of the oil production process. But that market isn't going away. And that ends up being like 90% of the hydrogen produced is in steam methane reforming, in distillation. And it's a question of transforming that entire process over to something new. And you think about what it takes to deploy one of these catalyzers, like you're literally building a new refinery. And a refinery goes for like small one goes for $200 million, a normal one goes for $1 billion. So a lot of this can depend on future capacity build out for these giant plants, where Syzygy actually has very little sway over how that market evolves.
Hmm.
And so there's a lot of moving parts. This is why energy is complicated.
Yeah. And just to talk about people who might not know the CCG technology, I think, and the reason why it's been such a so popular is because it uses light to
Mhm.
replace combustion in chemical productions, and that they've been using that for ammonia cracking, for also steam methane reforming, to really produce hydrogen, and also for other greenhouse gas reformings for syngas and fuel. So there's a lot of use cases for this, and like you said, they are piloting, they're getting customers, they are moving forward, but many of the investors are not feeling confident right now on how things are going to progress. So unfortunate for CZG, for Trevor, and it's going to impact many people in our ecosystem. We're going to have 67 people who will be looking for other opportunities. So we'll be keeping an eye on this talent coming out and seeing how we can help them match them with other opportunities in the
And
ecosystem.
importantly, 67 really talented people who should get picked up at another growing business because they know how to build stuff. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. What
Yeah.
else are we seeing in the ecosystem?
Yeah, I had the benefit of sitting down with a member of the GHP last week, just to
Mm,
catch up, see how things were going. Obviously, in the second week of kind of the new administration, and for those of you who don't know, GHP is Greater Houston Partnership. HEDI, which is Houston Energy Transition Initiative, kind of lives under there. The Center for Houston's Future lives under there, and it's I don't know. It's our chamber of commerce. It does some policy, and it's a place for kind of industry to come together. Oh, we're officially members of the GHP. Forgot about that. We signed up for that last week as well. And part of what I was curious about was, what is their plan going forward with engaging with the startup ecosystem. There's been some stops and starts at the city level. as things evolved around the transition from the Houston Technology Center to Houston Exponential and back again. And I think along the way we had challenges with COVID. Um, but I think the sentiment was there needs to be something that kind of brings people together at the startup level across all of the different industries that are kind of in Houston. The kind of key industries are energy. Oh gosh, what was it? Med tech. I forget what the third one was. I'm going to go with aerospace, but trying to bring people across to unify. And then, of course, there's traditional SaaS and AI is obviously a growth market for anybody. Fingers crossed, they're going to have some announcements around how to bring the community together over the next year. I'm not going to steal their thunder. That is part of the Thunderwatch, though, is keeping out for it. I was excited about that. But then I decided to also just kind of go down a different tact. I think all of us noticed there's been a massive drawdown in diversity, equity, and inclusion programs nationally. And I was just curious, like what's going on? What are the members saying? Because this is a place for industry to come together. And my forever question on this is diversity, equity, inclusion just a fad? And was it just marketing that people are putting up? And is that marketing coming down because people are changing, with the current ecosystem? N- the totally unscientific survey was this was a response to kind of the changing economic conditions. It wasn't as important to brand on the outside, but the reality is a lot of the people are still there. A lot of these companies, a lot of the industries that care about this are still there. But also, just like the energy industry generally has been inclusive for well before that fad and well before that period. And Nada, you and I had an interesting conversation about how kind of the modern DEI movement in Houston kind of felt old hat. I don't know if you want to describe that a little bit.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely true. Like I mentioned, my dad worked in the oil industry, and he always spoke about, how, um, diversity, equity, inclusion. Like I heard those words from him when I was like very, very young. So this is something that's not new to the energy industry, especially these big corporates. They've been talking about it. They want to promote more women and people with different backgrounds. So suddenly, what felt like a new wave over the past decade for this industry, it's something that they've been on it for multiple decades. And it's not something that you would see them taking away. It's just for many of these companies, it's integral, it's part of their values, and you don't just take away a value. But if you are taking it away, so the companies who are taking it away, well, it just shows that that's not a value for them, and that's just fine. That's just how they operate, and they were maybe also just doing it on a superficial level. So I know, we spoke about Accenture
Hmm.
getting a lot of heat. Women CEOs saying she's dropping their DEI goals, and many are questioning whether they actually meant it in the first place, and were just kind of doing it because that was kind of the fad.
And I think one of the things about Houston, and it's kind of surprising for people coming from elsewhere, is Houston's diverse. What drives that? What makes that true? And the reality is, it's the energy industry. Like it's amazing to me how many people we see here who come from somewhere else, and you realize it's the best of the best, kind of being pulled out of the local markets where the energy industry operates, and they bring them back to Houston for training, for leadership, for rotation programs. And then they stay, or they're part of our energy ecosystem. They're going to be part of the energy transition ecosystem. It was really hard to impress that upon our Boston colleagues when I was at Greentown Labs, that this is a place that's just like, it's innate. We don't need to go off and kind of define new programs, because it's just part of things working. Um, but it's invisible, and that shows up in our good food. So I'm always going to go out and get good Mediterranean food, or Chinese food, or something else. But I think the uh, the zeitgeist here is one where you kind of have to be socialized. Like you have to work with people from everywhere. Now, obviously, once you leave kind of the greater Beltway area and you go out to other parts of Texas, maybe that doesn't exist in the same way. But Houston itself, you just got to play well with everyone, and that's the reality. So I don't necessarily see a lot of our energy industry changing. I see a lot of that overlapping into the energy transition and energy tech. Um, but it is funny to see that change and it feel like things are kind of shifting under your feet. We are obviously a very diverse company here at Energy Tech Nexus. I don't foresee anything changing with how we put our team together. So,
Suddenly, we're gonna see only Jasons
oh yeah, oh
uh,
yeah.
on this Thunderwatch. Um, yeah. But we could end with one other news that I read recently.
Mhm.
Have you heard of Kodiak Robotics, Jason?
No, no, I haven't. Tell me about them.
So apparently, it's the first autonomous trucking company that
Mhm.
has sold a truck to the customers and they've deployed it in the field right here in Texas in the Permian Basin. 8 hours away from us, I think. I used to think Midland is a lot closer, but someone was like, because I was like, we could go there for a day trip, and they're like, it's 8 hours away. So they, Kodiak Robotics, their customer Atlas Energy Solutions, have deployed this first autonomous truck really in the field because these oil fields are kind of remote, so you can test there, and they're hauling loads of frac sand
Mm.
back from their facilities. And they have two trucks in operations. So I thought that was really exciting. Finally, we're seeing, we've seen the autonomous cars. We've seen I don't know if it's Uber or Waymo that uses autonomous vehicles. I was in Austin a few weeks ago, and in some countries and some cities, and I know in Silicon Valley, it's a lot more common. But trucks is, this kind of transportation is really where you use a lot of carbon intensive fuel. So that's really exciting to see. So Kodiak Robotics, the company's based out of California, Mountain View. It's on a Series C. I think it's raised a total of
Mm.
300
Good.
million today. So exciting to see that in operation in Texas.
Yeah, and this is actually an interesting use case. Without going into a lot of the details, I can see the pros and cons. One of the pros is like driving around people is messy, just because people are like completely autonomous and they don't always follow the rules. And when you take this off road, you kind of remove a lot of that elements or variables. On the other hand, you're off road, and if anyone's been in the Permian Basin and have like driven to a well pad, it is dirt. Sometimes you have to go through like cattle ranches to get to where you're going. Sometimes there's a gate in front that someone has to get out and open for you to get access to the site. Luckily, during a frac operation, there's going to be plenty of people. You got a whole drilling rig. You're going to have frac trucks, and so there'll always be someone there to receive the shipment. But like trucking is hard, and surprisingly, a lot of the accidents that happen out in the Permian Basin are trucking related. You got these like skinny roads. Everyone's going 90 miles an hour, um, and people are tired. And so moving to autonomous can be safer, it can be better. The other challenge they have in the industry is there's like a zero drug tolerance policy in the oil field because you're honestly managing heavy equipment. Like it's not just the truck, it's not just the drilling rig or the wireline machine. Everything is big and will kill you. Um, and we've seen a lot of movement to automation because there's a lot more reliability. You can get workers who where you don't have to worry as much about kind of the drug testing. Um, and this is one of those monotonous jobs where you have to kind of be on while you're moving your heavy machine all across the Permian Basin. So it's going to be great for safety, good for making things more efficient, and it's that interesting use case because you're not worried about like dealing with automation in downtown Houston. You're dealing with it out there where the worst thing that happens is you can kind of pull the vehicle over to the side of the road if and it won't disrupt traffic. And another point towards seeing automation move in the oil field. Speaking of other financings, I was looking at other fundraisings in just in the broader ecosystem. Saw a good number of seed rounds get funded in the $5 to $15 million range. There was Macro Cycle I saw that was doing circularity. They raised around, I think it was a seed round. It was led by Clean Energy Ventures up there. Circularity is like the only thing that downstream petrochemical companies want to talk about. That is like taking your polymers, breaking them down into monomers, and reusing them so you can kind of actually recycle. If you haven't been digging in, a lot of recycling is challenging because the plastic like doesn't return to the same quality. It doesn't have the same stiffness or other properties, and so a lot of what they call like post-consumer grade plastic just isn't as good. and the ability to like really truly circularize and rejuvenate the plastic is going to be huge for being able to properly recycle. So that's exciting. I saw a company, Mantle 8, I think that's how you pronounce it, was funded out of the United Kingdom. They're looking at geologic hydrogen. I think Breakthrough Energy put money into them. This is the canonical white hydrogen. Um, and it means people are putting serious capital into sourcing that hydrogen in the ground. And so that's an interesting one. And then I saw Presto raised a seed round. They raised a whopping $15 million. I was talking to a founder last week, and they were asking me, is $5 million too big for a seed round? The answer is no. Everyone is still raising massive seed rounds, and you should definitely consider it. Again, the market has to be there to justify it, but there's appetite for investors who are willing to deploy cash. Presto is doing EV charging networks, so they're going to put out. Sorry, they're not doing the hardware. They're doing the hookup and payment process, which is like the number one complaint for people who use these third party EV chargers is sometimes like the payment to connect system is just terrible. And so there's capital obviously being deployed because the charging networks are big enough to adopt that kind of new technology. So good, healthy opening for the year at the seed level. Good deals will get funded, and I think that's the important thing to remember. And these are interesting trends that we're seeing.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think what we learned from last year was also it's like less deals but bigger deals.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the trend I think we're going to continue to see. So yeah, thank you everyone for joining today.
We got to talk
Yeah.
about two things because I saw
Oh,
Salias was on here.
yeah,
We got to
exactly.
talk
So I
about
was going to say,
yeah. Go ahead.
yeah, we have the Energy Tech Conclave coming up, and Silas is here on the chat. So he's going to be in town in Houston from Wisconsin. So we'll be doing a live podcast with him. So remember to join for that. And we also just released a new podcast
Mhm.
that we actually went on the Clean Techies podcast. That's Elias and Somar host. How do you say his name?
I couldn't tell you. We'll find out on Wednesday.
Yeah, but anyway, it was Silas who was hosting it. And we've gotten really good feedback on that podcast already. We will also be airing it on the Energy Tech Startup podcast in a week or two. So watch out for that. Anything else you wanted to mention, Jason?
No, I wanted to give a shout out to I think Open Circuit. This is used to be the old Energy Gang, so lots of like podcast love to all the other fellow podcasters out there. I'm excited for this one. It's Energy Gang is kind of coming back. This is Stephen Lacey, Jigger Shaw, and Catherine Hamilton. They did a good job just helping people keep updated on like what's going on at a national level. So while the Thunderwatch is more like Houston focused and energy tech focused, that would be a future go-to to understand kind of what's happening at a national and international level. I think they do a lot more homework than we do, or they just might be smarter than us. We'll find out. But I'm looking forward to them. I just saw that they dropped their first like intro pod over the weekend, and excited for that. And then I think just generally, like, glad to have you guys here. Thanks for listening. If you're a founder or someone just interested in the energy industry, consider joining the Nexus. Learn about what's happening in Houston. Connect with your fellow innovators. We got the YouTube channel up and running, so subscribe on there. And join us for our next event. Join us on Wednesday. If you see it pop up on your feed, you are like it's showing up in your feed because it's targeted at you. So please come, and we'd love to see you. And our goal is just to help create authentic connections across the ecosystem.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining. And remember, we want to keep this interactive. So if you're watching the recording, please join us live next time. Post your questions and we'll try to answer them either live or through chat later. Thank you.
See ya.